Hi developers, in this video we'll learn how to deploy an ASP.NET Core web application and a SQL Server database into Azure. For that, we'll create the Azure App Service and also a SQL Azure database from the Azure Portal. In a later video, we'll be automating this task using ARM templates. But for now, let's start doing that using the Azure Portal. To do that, here I'll go to my Azure Portal account right here, and here I'll start with creating the SQL Azure database. For that, here I'll go to create a resource, then I select databases, then select SQL database. In this template right here, I'm asked to give a name for my database. So I'll call it WebApp with a database, then select my subscription. Then here I create a new resource group, and the resource group is a group that will have both my web application and my database, so that I can manage them as one unit. I call it web app with database minus RG for resource group. For the source right here, I go and select blank database. Then here I need to configure the required settings. So I can either choose one of my already created databases, or I can create a new server. Here I'll go and create a new server, and again I'll call it a web app with database minus server. Then I need to specify the login, admin, and then the password. Once I have done that, I'll go and click select. Then here I go to change the pricing tier to select the basic one in order to save some money right here. Then click apply. Here I go and check pin to dashboard so that I can get this resource group shown in my dashboard. Then I click create in order to start creating the database server with the database inside of it. Once that starts creating or deploying, I'll go and create a new resource for my web app. For that right here, I'll go and create a resource, select web, then select web app. I give my application a name. Let's call it here web app with a database minus MVC. Select the same subscription, and then I'll use the same resource group that I have created already for my SQL database, which is right here web app with database minus RG. Pin it to dashboard also, then hit create to start provisioning the web application that's gonna host my ASP.NET Core MVC application. Once the deployment succeeded for both the web app and the SQL Server instance, here I go to my web app, and here I have the option to attach a SQL Server to my web application. I can do that by going to data connections. So I select it. Then here I can add a new or I can attach a SQL database to my web app. Here it's gonna be of type SQL database. Then I go and configure the required settings, so I have all my databases displayed here. I'll check the one that I want to use with this web app. I select it, then I check for the connection string, and here I need to specify the admin username and the admin password that I have already created for my SQL database. Hit create, then OK. Now I can see that here I do have the connection from my web app to my SQL Server database. Now let's start deploying the web app from Visual Studio. For that, here I go back to Visual Studio, then select my web app, right click, then click publish. Here we have multiple options. So here I want to publish my web app inside an app service inside Azure. So I can either create the web app from Visual Studio, but here I have already created it using the Azure Portal. For that, I go and select an existing one. Then I click publish. And here, because I'm connected to Visual Studio, or I'm connected to Visual Studio and also to my Azure account using the same email right here, then Visual Studio will connect to Azure API and retrieve all the web apps that I have created. So all what I need to do is just select the MSDN, my MSDN subscription, in which I use it to create the web app. Then here I select the resource group. So I'll go and look for the resource group that I have already created, which is the web app with a database RG. Then I select my MVC application web app, click OK, and here it shows the wizard to publish the web app. Here it gets all the required configuration and parameters in order to publish the web app, and it's gonna use the web deploy for deployment. Then clicking publish will start publishing the web app to Azure. So here it finishes publishing the web app, so it launches the browser inside my web app. And here it is, the domain name for the web app that I already created in Azure Portal. So if now I go to employees, then here I get an error, an internal error. That's because our web app in this stage could not connect to the database. The database is connected to our web app on Azure, but not to my MVC application right here. To do that, here I go to configure, and selecting configure will display this window right here where it have all the required information to publish the web app. Then I click next, and at this window we have the settings to select the database. So here it's discovering the data context inside my web application. So it will discover that here I do have the web app data context inside my data folder. The data context points to a local database inside my machine, but here after deploying the web app to Azure, I wanted to connect to the SQL Azure database, not the one inside my local machine. So it needs to update the connection string that it uses to connect to the database. So I can update that connection string by selecting here databases, and here we see that now it have the connection string to the database inside Azure. So this one is the database that we already created. So here I go and select this option to use this connection string at runtime. I'll click save, and what this will do, after the app is published to Azure, it will go to update the value of the connection string inside my app settings. So it will replace this folder or this connection string by the one to connect to the SQL Azure connection string. Now I come back to the deployment, and here after configuring that new connection string right here, I'll go and publish again our web app. It launches again my web app. So if I go now to my employees, then here I get the empty table for my employees. That's a good sign that everything works well. So let's check that. We go and create a new employee with the email, then click create, and here our employee was added successfully to our database. We can check the database inside Azure. If I go here to view, then server explorer, then here you can see that after connecting to my Azure account inside Visual Studio, I can display all my databases and all my cloud services. I'll expand SQL databases. Then here I'll go and refresh my list to get the refreshed list of databases. And here I can see the database that I already created. I right click and select here Open in SQL Server Object Explorer. That will display this window asking for the database I want to connect to. So I'll browse to Azure. Then here I go and select my database. After that, I need to provide the username and also the password that I already used. I select remember password, then click connect. Here it have a firewall rule. So database in Azure have this firewall rule to not allow any address to or any IP address to connect to the database. So we only allow the current IP address of my machine. That's a security option. I click here add my client IP in order to allow my local machine and only my local machine to connect to that SQL Server database. Of course, that's in addition to the web app that already have access to that database because it is hosted on Azure. So now that I have connected to that database, I can expand the tables inside that database. Here we can see our employee table, and we can see here all the columns for that table. Let's right click the employee table and select view data in order to be able to see the data stored in that table. This will connect to the SQL Azure inside the Azure, and it will retrieve all the data stored there. So here we can see our employee table with the data that we have already created there. Follow me in the next video to show you how we can make changes to our database using the database project, which will create the SQL scripts, then apply those changes to either our local database but also to our SQL Server database inside Azure.